Chapter 1. Young men, are you a Calvinist? On October 15, 1970, I was faced with the prospect of fulfilling a 2-year dream. The possibility of becoming a pastor in a very few days. It was not that a church had already extended me a call or that I had even preached a trial sermon, but a pastorless church had contacted me and wanted to talk with me about a possibility that I would become the next pastor. I couldn't believe it. The church wasn't a large one in any sense. 50 or 60 in attendance on Sunday morning. The salary, though I did not know the amount then, surely wasn't anything to write home about. It wasn't even located in any large metropolitan city or even in a rural county seat town. Rather, it was a country church out in the middle of almost nowhere, and it was attended by rural people of humble means and ways. Those facts matter not to a young preacher who was sophomore ministerial student at a local Baptist college. I had only preached a couple of dozen times since I had been converted as a junior in high school, and the thought of preaching every week, the thought of having a church of my own, the thought of having a people of my own, and the thought of having a pulpit of my own was almost overwhelming. Many of the rural churches within a 60-mile radius had depended on a local Baptist college to provide them preachers and pastors over the years. This arrangement not only supplied the church's needs, but also furnished finances for young men seeking to get an education and even some practical experience in the process. You can imagine my joy and excitement when one of these churches contacted me and desired an interview to determine if I would be a possible candidate for their new pastor. The date of the interview was set for October 15, 1970, 1 week after they called me on the phone. That week between the phone call and the face-to-face interview seemed interminable. Would that day ever arrive? It wasn't that I didn't have anything to occupy my thoughts. I did. Wishing to make the best possible impression on their interview committee, I tried to anticipate every twist or turn the upcoming meeting might take. What would they ask me about doctrine? I tried to bone up by reading a booklet on Baptist beliefs, and I even sought to memorize some key verses in each doctrinal area. Whatever they asked, I decided I would be authoritative in voice, confident in manner, and quick in response. I wouldn't get into areas which I knew were controversial or which I might consider to be my realms of weakness. What would they ask me about the denomination? I didn't have a Baptist pedigree. No father had been a Baptist preacher or deacon. No perfect attendance Sunday school pins to flaunt. No vacation Bible school certificates to declare. No sword drill awards to show, etc. Before my conversion in high school, I had been nothing. Maybe, at least, that would evoke more empathy and understanding from them than if I had been from some other enemy denomination. I concluded I would not only have to be authoritative and confident, but I would have to be humble and teachable if areas of denominational life arose. I did make some attempt to cover my ignorance in this area as I read a short history of the denomination and tried to remember a few important men, dates, and events. They asked me about a wife. I didn't have one. Wasn't really looking for one. But I guess I couldn't tell them I wasn't against it if someone came along. Thus, with great care and concern, I prepared for that eventful hour of the interview. Finally, the day arrived. I drove the 40 miles from the college campus to the rural setting of the church, planning to arrive well ahead of schedule and even anticipating the possible emergency with my 8-year-old Plymouth Valiant. Wouldn't do to be late to this important moment of history. I hardly noticed the fading of daylight or the dawn of the darkness as I made my way over the winding roads. It may be an average evening for everyone else along that road as families arrived home from the responsibilities of the day and sat down to supper and got up for an evening of television. But for me, it was the day of my life. As I saw it then, what took place in the next few hours could mean the difference between my having a church to pastor or the continuation of my existence as a young preacher boy. I continued to drill into my head the thought, be confident and authoritative, whatever they ask you, but also be humble and teachable. The committee was composed of 6 members, 4 men, 2 women. They were extremely friendly and seemed to be more ill at ease than I was at times. Hey, perhaps they didn't know any more about what they were doing than I did. This comforted me. and boasted my determination to be confident and authoritative. They began by asking me about my early life and conversion. I responded with a sure winner as I told them I had not been privileged to be reared in a Christian or Baptist home, but I had grown up in an orphanage. I told them of my salvation experience in some detail, confident that I knew about that event. They were quite touched, and I even noticed tears in one dear lady's eyes. I told the truth, but did so with fervor and sincerity. Without being asked, I went on to tell them of those I had won to the Lord since my conversion. They seemed to rejoice greatly with me. We were off to a great start, if only the rest of the interview went as well. Next, they asked me about doctrine, and I found that my study had paid off splendidly. Did I believe the Bible? Oh yes, I replied, and quoted at length 2 Timothy chapter 3, verses 16 through to chapter 4, verse 4. Did I believe in salvation by faith alone? Absolutely, I asserted, quoting scripture again, adding, that is in large a part of the reason I became a Baptist. On and on we went covering the subjects of baptism, the Lord's Supper, the second coming of Christ, and as my answers seemed to satisfy them, my confidence and authority grew. When we finished doctrine, I felt greater confidence when, as I had anticipated, they asked me about the denomination. Did I believe in the denomination's programs? Was I committed to the denomination's mission program? My reading of the booklet had again done the job, and I was able to drop a few names, dates, and events that they didn't even know, and my confidence grew. Finally, we came to what I felt was the end. I had handled every question with skill and ease. My confidence and authority had grown with each answer. Yet, I had maintained a humble attitude to it all. Had handled myself exactly the way I planned. It appeared I was home free. When the moderator asked if there were any other questions they wanted to ask me, and that drew a long period of silence. I was waiting for him to call the meeting to a conclusion when all of a sudden one man spoke up. He had only listened previously as the others had participated. Now he had a question to ask the young preacher boy. He said with what appeared to be a sneer and slight scowl, "Young man," he said, "are you a Calvinist?" He caught me completely off guard. I didn't know what a Calvinist was. I had never heard the word Calvinist. I could tell by the tone of his voice and abrasive spirit that he wasn't a Calvinist, and whatever a Calvinist was, it must be something nasty, like something this church would never want in a pastor. Quickly, I saw I had a problem. I wanted to tell him I certainly was not a Calvinist, because obviously that was the desired answer, but could I tell them I was not something that I couldn't even define? If I admitted that I didn't know what a Calvinist was, would they think I was too uninformed doctrinally to be their pastor? It seemed clear to me, by the look on their faces as they awaited my answer, that Calvinism, whatever it was, had caused some sort of problem in their church at some point of time in the past. Maybe it was a major problem now, and they were looking for someone with great knowledge on the subject who could steer the church in the right direction. Would they call a man who was totally ignorant of that which had caused a major rift in their fellowship? Suppose I said no to their question, and then they wanted to discuss the subject further, and that would force me to betray not only my ignorance, but also my deceit in answering their question. I had a decision to make, and I had to make it quickly. I decided to fall back on my initial plan to answer with confidence and authority. So with inward hesitation and fear, but with the outward air of an expert on the subject, I replied, "No, sir, absolutely not. I find no authority in Scripture for anyone to be a Calvinist." The answer seemed to satisfy them, as the moment of tension was broken by my reply. We all relaxed once again, and I diplomatically made some statement about having a heavy schedule of homework awaiting me back at school. They thanked me for taking the time from my studies to meet with them. We prayed, and I was on my way. Surprisingly, as I made my way back over the winding roads in the dark, my mind was not on whether they would call me as a pastor or not. My mind was on the question, "Young man, are you a Calvinist?" My mind kept turning over my answer of "No, sir, absolutely not. Find no authority in Scripture for anyone to be a Calvinist." Had I lied to the committee? My answer of "No" was correct, I rationalized. How could I be something I couldn't even define at that moment? And my answer of finding no authority in Scripture for anyone to be a Calvinist was correct also. I hadn't found, to my knowledge, anything in Scripture that would authorize one to be a Calvinist. But on the other hand, could I possibly be a Calvinist and not know it? If I was, I guess I'd lied. And maybe I had found things in Scripture that would make people Calvinists and just didn't know it, because I didn't know what a Calvinist was. I determined in my heart, as my 62 Valiant glided through the night, that I was going to find out what a Calvinist was. More than that, I was going to find the answer to the question, "Young man, are you a Calvinist?" The next time someone asked me that question, I would be ready.